Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, weighing in at the same as a very large dog or overweight child, this Alienware ALX, dating back to 2010, is an absolute behemoth, in keeping with traditional Alienware style of course. Costing £1,900 9 years ago, or just over $2,300, I found this one last week for around £150, a significant reduction when compared to the original recommended retail price. It still looks pretty tidy on the outside apart from a few marks here and there, but what really matters is what's on the inside, and today we're going to find that out. Can this near 10-year-old machine still game, and if not, which parts of it will need upgrading to keep up with modern requirements? Let's begin the alien autopsy. Actually, wait a second, can we just take a moment to appreciate the aesthetics some more? It might not be to everyone's taste, but I love the style of these cases. I think this generation of Dell's gaming specific machines certainly looked ahead of their time, even if the internals weren't always representative of that. Speaking of which, and it's clear this thing's never seen an air duster, but it's nothing compared to some old machines I've tested, as I'm sure most of you will know. The first thing that stands out in here, aside from the dust bunnies, is the old school trademark liquid CPU cooler. This one's attached to a socket 1366 motherboard that I'm told has been paired with an i7 processor. We've reviewed a few of these before, so that's nothing new, but what piques my interest is the rather unusual looking graphics card, which we'll get onto shortly. Before that though, I'd like to address a few other points. I knew we had an i7 in here, or at least I was told as much, but I was also informed of the 9 gigs of DDR3 memory. As soon as I saw the DIMMs, I did wonder whether this amount was correct, but as I removed one with the capacity of 1 GB, I knew that they'd all be different. Originally, I think this would have had 6 or 12 gigs installed, but at some point the previous owner has harvested the OG stuff and swapped it out. That made me wonder what else could be new inside here. So, we've confirmed the motherboard and liquid cooler to be original, but it was time to move on to this worryingly thin and aforementioned single slot GPU. What sort of power is it packing? Answer, well, it doesn't seem like much. According to Tech Power Up, my favourite go-to spec checking site, this is the OEM GeForce GTS 240, not to be confused with the GT 240. This card is specifically designed to be used in Alienware systems such as this one, but here's the thing. Back when this PC was new, you could either have this card in SLI, a Radeon HD 5870 or a 5870 in Crossfire. The default config, which comprised of two 240s in SLI, was only £20 cheaper than the HD 5870 single card config, yet that was a lot more powerful. So why the person who spec'd this one chose the Nvidia option, I really don't know. I would suggest that maybe money was tight, but come on, they paid $2K for an Alienware. Furthermore, because the second GTS 240 isn't here anymore, it could mean that it's been sold separately beforehand, or they requested the single card setup, which would again have been a little bit cheaper. All of this is powered by an Alienware 875 watt power supply, which sounds quite decent and offers plenty of spare cables for upgrades and whatnot. Speaking of upgrades, I was very pleasantly surprised to see an SSD in here, a Samsung 500GB 850 EVO to be precise. This was definitely an aftermarket change, as this only came with a 1TB HDD originally, which by the way is still installed in here too. I'm very happy about the solid state drive inclusion, which retails for about £70 to £80 on its own. There's a nice fan to cool these drives in here as well. So even if the graphics card is pretty lousy by today's standards, the rest of the specs make up for it, I reckon anyway. But all this means nothing if the computer doesn't work. So Mr. Alienware, shall we turn you on? That sounds a bit creepy. Shall we switch you on? Slightly better. Pressing the power button activates the traditional whoosh sound of the rear fan firing up, and with that we get a cool set of lighting effects combined with the flashing alien head. Again, it's all for show and literally adds nothing to the performance, but it's exactly this kind of showmanship that's always made these PCs popular. Because let's face it, you could build so much more for so much less spec-wise. That's usually the case with pre-builts, but in recent years, the price gap has certainly got smaller. Oh, and I nearly forgot, we also got this very cool Alienware keyboard with our purchase too. For some reason it requires two USB connectors to work, but that's not unexpected at this point. Something tells me this isn't the original mouse though. Don't ask me why, I just don't think it necessarily matches the rest of the styling. Determined to find out what this machine could do, I jumped straight into some games. I should also mention that this PC has been upgraded to Windows 10, which booted in a matter of seconds thanks to the SSD. I was worried when I bought it that we'd be dealing with Vista, but part of me was at the same time hoping for 7, my personal favourite OS. As some of you probably expected, gaming performance was a little lackluster. Although Tech Power Up said this thing supports DX11, I'm afraid this is not the case. It's a G92 based GPU and won't run anything modern, unless of course the game allows for it. After all, the driver version for the GTS 240 stops at 342.01, which released in 2016. It's often the case that GPUs will age a lot worse than processors, but the i7 in this thing, for example, is still pretty good. It has 4 cores and 8 threads and turned out to be the i7-920 in the end. But can it run Crysis? Well, last week I was messing around with a few texture packs and I seem to have left a Crysis 3 mod installed here, hence the differences with the rifle textures and a few of the trees looking different. This doesn't seem to affect performance at all if I'm honest, but it was worth mentioning, in case you wondered why things looked a little different. Here we're running the game at the highest settings at 720p, and as you can see the i7-920 is plodding along just fine. You'll actually experience this in most modern games too. It was about $1,000 at launch, so anyone who bought this way back when certainly made a wise investment. And when you take into account the seemingly high value of 1366 based motherboards, one of these can be a pretty fruitful find. Even Fortnite, which luckily still supports DX10, runs at 720p with everything on low. Medium settings were also fine-ish, but there were a few more dips below 30, so low is the wisest move here. Still, for 60 FPS you'd be better off dropping the render scale a bit too. I've left things on native 720p to try and preserve some of the graphical quality. The last game I tested was COD Black Ops, which seems to have a 91 FPS cap, because the frame rate never went above it, and never really went too far below it. I've been playing a lot of this game recently as it's one of my favourites. This match was against the bots, but things didn't differ too much online. In fact, there were no changes, so this classic will be more than playable. There may be a way to remove the cap for anyone wondering, but it doesn't seem necessary as I don't think you'd see figures on this GPU that would go far beyond the FPS limit anyway. So let's recap. Well, it's probably not a good idea to rush out and buy a brand new Alienware PC in 2019 thanks to their high prices and the fact that you could build something with similar specs for quite a bit less. Purchasing one of these old ones may just be a decent investment. Now, although we did get a pretty useless graphics card by modern standards, we got that i7-920, we've got a 1366 motherboard, and we've got an Alienware 875W PSU, all of which are worth quite a bit of money on their own, thanks to the fact that they are OEM parts. So even if you purchase one of these to sell the parts individually, you might find yourself making a tidy bit of profit on them. If you want to buy one because, like me, you think they look pretty cool, and you don't have much experience building PCs, you want something pre-built that you can add a graphics card to, you can purchase one of these knowing that that is entirely possible as well. Remember, we've got an 875W power supply in here, which will let us upgrade to pretty much anything on the market, and most GPUs will work okay with an i7-920. I think in the past I've tested a GTX 1070 with one, and found that while there may be a couple of bottlenecks in some situations, a lot of the time the two work quite well together. Remember though, don't be drawn in by the looks of this thing. Don't pay over the odds. If it's up for a sensible price, it may be worth purchasing when you keep everything in mind, but always be sensible with your cash. If it's cheaper to build something of similar spec from scratch, do that instead. But to wrap up, I think that sometimes you can find a pretty decent deal in the world of pre-builts, and with that Alienware name slapped on it, in a lot of cases you're guaranteed to not even lose any money should you sell it on a year or so later. It's the Alienware brand name, man. It's just popular. People always seem to want them. with all that said, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed a look inside the Alienware mystery machine. If you enjoyed it, leave a like on it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you've got a cool Alienware under your desk at home. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.